Hello, everyone. So glad to be here today. I am back. I have taken a hiatus and I will explain why. But of course, I'm having to deal with this really quick tech issue, which hopefully is resolved soon. Oh, let's see if it'll let me do it. Oh, it's not going to let me do it. Okay. So, all right. Nonetheless, hi everyone. Kimsey here, and I am so excited to be here. It feels so good to be back. Yeah, I took the last like 4, 6 weeks off or so from going live to really kind of step back and evaluate different things within my business, right? I think it's easy to start going through the motions until you step back and think, or really question with a more discerning mind, like what's working, what's not. Can I be allocating, spending my time in a better way? So that's what I was doing. But I've missed everyone, and it feels really good to be back. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Kimsey Berkwin. I'm an integrative nutritionist in my online nutrition and wellness practice called Progressive Health and Wellness, where I work with ambitious men and women who are struggling with their mental and physical health by taking a root caused body mind approach to optimize their overall health and wellness. So, today I'm going to be talking about what many women, so sorry, you probably just heard my sweet little daughter who's waking up from a nap, grumpy. But what many women dread, which is all things PMS. So, not just talking about the irritability or weepiness, but I'm talking about like this talk is for you if you have those things, right? The irritability, the weepiness, the mood swings, lack of resiliency, stress tolerance, but also like bloating. Do you suddenly like blow up like you're 4 months pregnant around either ovulation or leading up to the period? Or there can be some other, do you get like breast swelling, tenderness, water retention where you just feel puffy, or like you might quite literally not be able to fit into a pair of pants around that time of the cycle, or like gain a bunch of water weight and you can see the change 3, 4, 5 pounds on the scale? Perhaps you might notice some sneakier symptoms though. You will probably still notice a correlation, especially if you start paying attention. You'll probably start noticing a correlation around the menstrual cycle. So if it worsens around ovulation or the week leading up to the period. But what if you notice like histamine symptoms, like anxiety or heart palpitations, or hives or diarrhea or constipation? You may notice more fogginess, fatigue. Do you struggle with low iron despite taking supplements? Do you generally have you had gallbladder issues? Do you generally have irritable bowel syndrome? What I'm listing off here are symptoms of estrogen dominance. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, the hidden hormone imbalance that might be plaguing not only your menstrual cycle symptoms, but also just how you feel in general. So, what I'll go through is explaining what estrogen dominance is. Then I'll talk about how it forms. And then, of course, we'll talk about lab testing to figure out is this really what's going on for you or not? And then, of course, what to do about it, how to have healthy estrogen levels naturally. So, before I jump into it all, drop a comment if you're here. It's been a long time since I've been here. I would love to connect with everyone. I'm on Facebook in my Facebook group, which is called Holistic Solutions for Mental Health and Wellness. I'm also on YouTube. And raise a hand, drop an emoji if any of those symptoms resonated with you, ladies. Do you notice any of those? Do you notice any of those? Another one that I'll drop in there too is, did you have gallbladder problems that developed after pregnancy? That can be another direct relationship with estrogen and higher estrogen levels. Pregnancy really ramps up estrogen and progesterone. After delivery, those hormones come back down, but some of the damage can be done. So some women develop more stones or thickened bile in their gallbladder during the pregnancy. And then as you'll learn today, that can be kind of set you up to have high estrogen post pregnancy, like postpartum, longer than it would normally go on. Okay, so what is estrogen dominance? So the two main female sex hormones are estrogen and progesterone. And estrogen dominance refers to in relation to progesterone. So if there's high levels of estrogen to in relation to progesterone, that can either be high estrogen to normal progesterone, or high estrogen to low progesterone. It used to be considered if there's normal estrogen to low progesterone. I take that out of the equation now because I would consider that more low progesterone than I would estrogen dominance, right? We would not address someone who has normal estrogen levels and just low progesterone in the same way that we would one of these other two camps where overt estrogen is elevated to either normal or low progesterone. Why this is significant is because those two hormones are supposed to balance each other's activities. So I think of estrogen as a active proliferative hormone. It increases the activity of different tissues, it increases growth of different tissues, and quite literally our brain chemistry, it increases the activity of more energizing kind of active neurochemicals, think like dopamine or norepinephrine, for example. Progesterone, on the other hand, when I say it makes tissue grow, it makes like fat cells grow. It can make fibroids grow. It can make polyps grow. It just makes things grow, right? Progesterone, on the other hand, is more calming, soothing, anxiolytic. It's more relaxing. It relaxes muscles. It relaxes the digestive tract. It relaxes our brain chemistry. Progesterone increases the production of GABA, for example, which is our inhibitory, anxiolytic brain chemical. So the two work hand in hand. And that's why if there's an imbalance between the two, you get more of activity of one, obviously, over the other. So, how does this happen, right? How can you have this imbalance where you have more estrogen than to balance progesterone? So, higher levels of estrogen. This can happen in a number of ways, but it's important to keep three things in mind. So, when in the body, whether you knowingly take a hormone like birth control or hormone replacement therapy, or your own body produces it, you want to use it and then lose it. And that's how the body maintains balance with basically everything, is that simple nutshell, if you will. So, how this can happen is there can be an overproduction for sure. So, you want to consider, is there an overproduction? Where we would typically see an overproduction happen is the conversion of testosterone into estrogen. That can happen in women for a number of different reasons. That can happen in men too, by the way. But if there's a conversion of testosterone into estrogen, there can be a conversion of androstenedione into estrogen. So androstenedione is another androgen. Those two things are done through a certain enzyme pathway. There can be an overproduction. We don't see as often an overproduction from the ovaries, but it can definitely happen. For example, we know that xenoestrogens, which are chemicals in the environment that mimic our estrogen, they actually increase our production of estrogen. So there can be an overproduction from the ovaries. And in fact, we'll actually see that with histamine intolerance. Histamine increases estrogen. So, conversion of an androgen into estrogen or an overproduction, that's one pathway. Second pathway is from knowingly taking it in through birth control or hormone replacement therapy. Third pathway is unknowingly taking it in through it's xenoestrogens are all we live in a sea of estrogen. So there are a number of chemicals that mimic our estrogen. What that means is those chemicals structurally look almost identical to our estrogen, just like my two hands look almost identical. But if you look really closely at my hands, right, I have rings on different fingers. They're not the exact same, but they're close enough that xenoestrogen can bind to the estrogen receptors on our cells and exert estrogenic effects, just as if it was our own bioidentical, like our own or a bioidentical estrogen. binding to that receptor. So think like parabens, phthalates, BPA. There's a number of different chemicals that can have this effect. There's even residual estrogen in tap water from gross, but the urine of women taking, especially those taking hormone replacement therapy or birth control, there's going to be higher levels anyways. So, your body produces it, you knowingly take it, you unknowingly take it, or you're not losing it appropriately. Think of those four pathways, right? Your body produces it, you knowingly take it, you unknowingly are exposed to it, or your body's not losing it appropriately. So let's talk about each of those pathways. I'm not going to spend too much time on the overproduction piece. What I will say kind of collectively about that conversion of androgens into estrogen, one big thing to be aware of is the importance of nutrient balance and blood sugar balance. Because in a lot of women, that's going to be some of the biggest drivers behind that. So what I mean by nutrient balance is, for example, zinc and copper are both involved in estrogen balance. Zinc inhibits that aromatase enzyme that converts the androgen into estrogen. Zinc deficiency can be really common. Magnesium deficiency, same thing. So like the need for essential minerals is really important to support that enzyme appropriately. And then blood sugar balance. So this is a whole other topic. If you want more specific information about balancing your blood sugar, please go to my Facebook group, Holistic Solutions for Mental Health and Wellness, and search blood sugar or search diabetes. There's a ton of information in there. But listen up, if you have had blood work run and your fasting glucose is above 90 or your hemoglobin A1C is above like 5.2, then I'm talking to you, right? Or if you have the symptoms of, do you get hangry or irritable or cranky if you go longer than a few hours without eating? Do you get shaky or ravenously hungry, like I need to eat now or someone's going to die kind of thing? Do you get tired? You might start yawning or maybe get foggy or anxious or your mood drops. Do you struggle with insomnia? Do you crave sweets or carbs? Any of those can be some signs of dysregulated blood sugar, dysglycemia. And then I gave you the numbers. So I won't get into right now like how to balance that. I'll talk about that later at the end about how to support your healthy estrogen levels. But some of the biggest reasons why that can drive the androgen conversion. Not the only ones, but some of the bigger ones. Okay, knowingly taking it. Right now, I'm just going to summarize that by saying that is a choice. So if you're taking hormone replacement therapy, if you are taking birth control, that is your choice. But I do want you to know that that may have downstream ramifications. And it's so important to support your body's elimination of the estrogen at the very least. Your body will downregulate what it produces whenever you take an exogenous hormone. But it can still, there's effects that, especially birth control in particular. If it's bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, that'll be a little different. That usually doesn't go through the digestive tract, but birth control, oral, like pill form birth control does. And that can disrupt the gut microbiome. It can affect the gallbladder. Like there's a number of things that can affect the elimination of estrogen. So, but in the end, that's your choice. That's all I'll say about that. Number 3, unknowingly exposed to it. So thinking about chemicals. I'm going to talk about how to detoxify your environment, little tweaks that you can make. I know there are some of you listening thinking like, oh, whatever, like the plastic cup I drink out of isn't raising my estrogen levels. Yes, it is, because it's not just that little plastic cup, right? It's the accumulation of it all. And without an awareness around this, not only is it that little plastic cup, but it might be the receipt paper that you're touching. It might be the microwaved meals in plastic. It might be the tap water. It would be the personal care products that you're using. It's a lot. So I was one of those people where it's like, oh, this can't be that big of a deal, but like it is. It's also, you have to think globally and thinking about how these things accumulate to appreciate really how much we're being exposed and how little tweaks can lower your body burden of the xenoestrogens that we're being exposed to. Those xenoestrogens, like I said, they're chemicals that have estrogenic effects on our tissue. They also increase our own production of estrogen. They're connected to infertility, ladies. Like it is not a good thing. It is really not something that you want to mess around with. And it's, I think, the easiest thing to dismiss. But that's why I'm putting an emphasis on it right now, that is a really low hanging fruit that you can really improve your health by making those changes by detoxing your environment. Okay. And then the big one, supporting clearance. This is a really big one. This is probably where it gets a lot of people. So after we use our estrogen, the estrogen is going to be detoxified through the liver, largely. Some through the kidneys, some can come out in sweat even, but it's going to go through the liver first before it goes through any of those phase 3 excretory pathways. So there's phase 1 in the liver, where the estrogen is being converted into a less potent form, if you will. There's one of 3 different pathways that can go down. I'm not going to get super techie here, but one is great, safe, protective. One is like, it's okay, it's mediocre. And the third is carcinogenic and toxic. So you want to make sure it's going down one of the first 2 and not the last one. Anyways, goes through phase 1, then it goes through phase 2, where it binds to a protein. That could be a methyl group. It could be the glucuronidation pathway. Hydroxylation. So it'll bind to a protein, and that is what allows it to be safely shuttled out of the liver and could go through the kidneys. Most of it is going to go through the bowels. So through the gallbladder, then it'll dump into the small intestines, and then we eliminate it in our stool. But we need nutrients, key specific nutrients to support that liver pathway. We need a healthy gallbladder to make sure that we're eliminating the estrogen appropriately through the bile. And we need healthy bowel movements and a healthy gut microbiome to ensure it's eliminated in the stool and it's not just recirculated, because inadequate bowel movements could be diarrhea, could be constipation, but IBS, if you will, and an imbalanced gut microbiome will cause that. It'll cause you to reabsorb your estrogen rather than eliminate it. The example I give clients is, it's like going to take out your trash and throw it in the dumpster, but you realize the dumpster's full, so you just throw it in your living room instead. Clearly, that's not sustainable. That's going to cause problems, right? Same thing here. So since that last piece is actually, I'm going to talk about labs. Let's talk about labs first. And then I'm going to talk about how to support this. And I'm really going to focus on the blood sugar piece, the detoxing your environment piece, and the supporting that elimination. So before we go through how to fix it, why don't we talk about knowing if you even have estrogen dominance, right? Because the symptoms are pretty ubiquitous. There can be a lot of different things that cause PMS symptoms and fatigue and brain fog, etc. But I will say the PMS symptoms tend to be pretty pronounced. So if you just have irritability and cramping, for example, but no water retention, no weight gain, no breast swelling and tenderness, no depressive tendencies, no really heavy menstrual cycles or clotty menstrual cycles, I'm not going to suspect estrogen as much. But if you have those other things and the irritability, then I will. So there are some key things that we can look out for symptomatically, but I would never base it on symptoms alone, even clients. I can go into it thinking it's probably that, and we're going to support the liver anyways, but I wouldn't definitively like come in hot with some estrogen lowering support until I had data. So let's talk about data. So if you go to your doctor, ladies, if you go to your OBGYN, you say, I'm having these symptoms, or I've been on birth control for a long time, or actually birth control makes it really hard to test hormones. So that's not going to be a great path, because if you're on birth control, any of the testing that I'm going to talk about is going to be not reliable, because you don't produce your own. You produce a lot less of your own estrogen when you're taking an estrogen-based birth control, and the estrogen in the birth control is not going to be picked up. So I would still focus on supporting the liver and the bowels for sure. But you're not going to test that great. So outside of that, if you go to your doctor and say, I'm having these symptoms, for example, or I want to test my hormones, they're going to do a blood test. Blood is okay. It'll give you a snapshot in time of what your estrogen was doing at that particular moment in the blood at the time of the blood draw. Also just shows what's circulating in the blood, not what is actually in the tissue doing work. So it's better than nothing, but when your estrogen levels come back normal, don't be discouraged, because that's often going to be the case, right? Women that have estrogen dominant symptoms, it's because the estrogen is high in the tissue, and it can be normal, even low in the blood and high in the tissue. It may show up high in the blood. And if it does, wonderful, it was caught, but don't be discouraged if it doesn't. So moving on to blood testing is not my favorite. Moving on to salivary testing. Salivary is great. I will often use salivary testing in my practice. Salivary shows more of the tissue levels of all three estrogens, estradiol, estrone, and estriol. Plus, you can combine it with other hormones like progesterone and the 4-point cortisol and DHEA, melatonin, and androstenedione to get, you can do that in blood too, but again, they're snapshots and it's not the tissue. So I will often use a salivary test for women that have just kind of some PMS type hormonal imbalance symptoms. If they have more pronounced estrogen driven complications like, or I'll say hormonal imbalances in general, like PCOS or endometriosis, or if they have a history of breast cancer, any of those scenarios, then I'll run the Dutch test, which is the third type of test. Dutch stands for dried urine test, comprehensive hormones, but it's a dried urine test. So in the Dutch test, you're technically looking at the metabolites of the steroid hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, cortisol, DHEA, et cetera. But the cool thing about that is you can glean a lot more information. So you can look at like the phase 1 metabolites in the liver, the phase 2 metabolites, you can look at that's getting into other hormones like cortisol and progesterone, et cetera. But you can look at nutrient status. So nutrients that are important for estrogen regulation. So that's really, really beneficial. You get the most information by far from the Dutch test. So I would very much advocate for either a salivary test or the urinary dried urine test. And then what you're looking for is it out of the range, right? Is it above the lab reference range? And then also cross-reference that to progesterone to see how significant are we talking? Like, is progesterone also low? Because if that's the case, the woman's going to be more symptomatic. And then if it's the Dutch test, then you can obviously look at the pathways that it's going down. So once we figure out that estrogen dominance is happening, what do we do about it? So that's where we talk about balancing blood sugar. Again, this isn't a blood sugar conversation, but some of the key things, easy things that you can do. Emphasize protein. So prioritize protein in your diet, aiming to get 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. So if you take your body weight and divide that by 2.2, and that will give you kilograms, and then just 1 gram. So just go with the 1 gram to make it easy. So call it between 50 to 100 grams or so of protein per day, because that will have a stabilizing effect on blood sugar. And if you're prioritizing getting in enough protein, you'll probably offset the number of carbohydrates that you're eating too. Next is break your fast with protein. So Breakfast, emphasize the protein. So a couple of scrambled eggs with spinach and avocado, for example. You could have hard boiled eggs with, again, some avocado or some sweet potato. You could do some cottage cheese if you're eating dairy, organic dairy. There's another source of xenoestrogen. That's not even xenoestrogen. That's just estrogen given to the cattle if it's non-organic. But nonetheless, you could do cottage cheese, you could do some Greek yogurt, you could do a coconut-based yogurt and mix some like protein powder in there. You could do a smoothie blended with some like blueberries and coconut, for example. But prioritize the protein and keep it lower carb at breakfast. Walk after meals. 10-15 minute walk after your meals, that can lower your glucose by like 20 points. So that's an easy hack. And then lastly, start to cut out snacks. So ideally space your meals. You can have 3 full meals, but ideally space your meals by like 4 to 5 hours, because that will mean that your body has to start dipping into fat to get through that 4 to 5 hours. And that will help increase your metabolic flexibility. So there's a lot more I could say about balancing blood sugar. Of course, exercise, period. But those are a few things. So balancing blood sugar, one big way. Number 2 is detoxify your environment. So this is what I was talking about getting rid of the plastics and the tap water and the personal care products that have 8 million ingredients. Truly, like what I would start with is the kitchen and then slowly work your way to the bathroom. So start in the kitchen and really try to use glass as much as possible. So glass cups, glass storage containers. I'm trying to think of where else plastic shows up. Glass, most plates and whatnot. Try not to use plastic plates, plastic, bowls, etc. Your cookware, start to detoxify your cookware. So Teflon out and go with like a ceramic or a stainless steel instead. Look into a water filtration system. I love Aquasana. Aquasana is great. They have countertop options. If you own your home, you can get it installed and have like a separate faucet, but they take their water through 3 to 4 stages, depending on the system that you get. And it's the most comprehensive I've seen for the best price. So Aquasana is a wonderful water filtration option. So that's the kitchen. And then I'll, encourage as much organic as possible. One of the biggest pesticides on the market is a xenoestrogen. So that is, as much organic as possible. It's called glyphosate, by the way. That's the herbicide I'm talking about. Like I said, dairy products, if it's not organic, those cows were fed hormones to fatten them up, have them produce dairy, have them produce milk for a longer period of time and more of it. So there will be a trickle down effect of estrogen in the milk. So if you eat dairy products, definitely go with organic grass-fed products. Same thing for beef in general. If you can do an organic grass-fed, it'll cut down on the amount of estrogen that you're exposed to in food. Okay, and then the bathroom, talking your shampoo, conditioner, soap, makeup, deodorant, lotion, like all those things start to go for non-toxic brands. There's a lot of different brands out there. I think the one that I switched to is called, name just escaped me. It's mineral something. I can look it up while we're talking. But it's on Amazon and it's pretty reasonably priced. Let's see if it comes up real quick. And if it doesn't, that is okay. Mineral Fusion. That's it. Mineral Fusion is an awesome brand for makeup, ladies. I also like Desert Essence for shower products. So shampoo, conditioner, soaps, etc. But you really want to avoid like parabens, phthalates. Fragrance is a big one. There's a whole host of ingredients, honestly. Okay, so that's the detoxify your environment. And then lastly, supporting the elimination of estrogen. So in the liver and in the bowels. So in the liver, we want to emphasize sulfur containing foods. So cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, phenomenal. Eggs, um, garlic, onion, all of those, they contain sulforaphane, which helps the sulfation pathway in the liver. Epsom salt baths would also be great. And um, essential fatty acids are important for overall kind of liver function, and then amino acids. So think just eating protein, eating significant protein, which is also why I said to start with protein for nutrition. But amino acids, because that phase 2 in the liver, they're bound to amino acids. So that that is important for ushering out the estrogen appropriately. B vitamins are also very important. So food-based form of B vitamins, meat, animal products are going to be the best. You can find some in seaweed too, but largely animal products. And remember, organs too. So liver, heart, but then of course, like the flesh, chicken, beef, lamb, bison, salmon, fish, whatever it might be. But again, as much organic and grass-fed, wild caught, all this stuff as possible. For supporting the gallbladder too, this is where we get into, we want the bile to be viscous and thin. So estrogen will thicken bile. And this is where we get kind of a double-edged sword, because since estrogen thickens the bile, that leads to sludge, which affects the appropriate emptying of the gallbladder, which then causes the reabsorption of the estrogen, because that will also affect constipation, diarrhea, bowel movements, gut microbiome balance. So it becomes this double-edged sword. Poor detoxification through the liver and gallbladder, big way that estrogen starts to back up back into the body. So for the gallbladder, everything I just mentioned will help, but some other key things. Drinking dandelion tea is really, like, throughout the day is really helpful. Supplementing with phosphatidylcholine. So you can get choline through eggs, but you're not going to eat eggs every single day. You might, but even still, supplementing can help. Phosphatidylcholine. I'll name some other supplements too. So calcium D-glucarate is one of my favorites for supporting not only the liver, but also the bowels, because it'll bind the estrogen, keep it bound in the bowels so that it is eliminated in stool. You can also supplement with DIM, which is or indole 3-carbinol, which is the active ingredient from the cruciferous vegetables. So there's two things that those cruciferous vegetables are supporting. And you can supplement with DIM. Be careful with DIM. That will push the phase 1 liver pathway. And so if there's an imbalance and like the phase 2 or phase 3 aren't working as adequately, then you can push it and create more of that more reactive estrogen. But taking small amounts, or at least just emphasizing those foods, can be helpful. Okay. Going back to the gallbladder. So dandelion tea, I mentioned. Drinking warm lemon water first thing in the morning. Drinking apple cider vinegar before meals, because that acidity helps the gallbladder, or you can just use bitters, helps the gallbladder contract. Castor oil packs. So applying castor oil with a warm compress over the gallbladder can also be really helpful. Let's see. And then bowel movements. If you struggle with constipation, especially, magnesium citrate can be helpful. So I often use magnesium glycinate too, but the citrate in this case has an effect on the gallbladder. So it helps the bile duct open, whereas glycinate won't do that. So magnesium citrate has a bowel releasing effect, if you will. It draws more water into the bowel so that you can have an easier bowel movement, but then it has that benefit on the gallbladder too. And supporting adequate bowel movements is really important for appropriately releasing the estrogen. You can also consider binders. So like activated charcoal or bentonite clay, that can be helpful as well. And then there are certain probiotics that you could use too, like Saccharomyces boulardii or Akkermansia muciniphila, spore-forming probiotics, and then of course the Lactobacillus bifidobacteria too. Okay, I think that covers it. Ladies, I really want you to appreciate that you do not have to struggle. So if you just dread your period or if you dread ovulation, it does not have to be that way. And you can absolutely have a completely symptom free menstrual cycle where you really don't notice a difference in how you feel, minus like the normal ebbs and flows of a monthly cycle, like extroversion versus introversion and types of exercise and things like that. So, if you want to talk more about really learning about where your hormones are right now, talk more about testing and how to figure out if hormone imbalance and estrogen dominance might be part of your story, please drop a comment below, comment estrogen below, or I've linked to my website, progressivehealthandwellness.com, where you can schedule a free phone call and we can talk, get to know each other better, talk more about the challenges you're having and what you're looking for, how I can help. And if it's a good fit, we'll talk about what next steps look like. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.